Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news, extension filers, IRS Free File, other resources available until October 15th for 2020 tax returns. COVID tax tip 2021-114, August 5th, 2021. The IRS reminds taxpayers who filed extensions for their 2020 tax return that electronic filing, payment, and other options for help with taxes are available until October 15th deadline. So note, if you went on extension for the 2020 taxes, we're back to the normal date. So normally the extension extends to October 15th. That's where we stand at this point in time. If you want to take advantage of some resources they gave for tax help, such as possibly free file tax software, you still have access to those, it looks like, up to the deadline. After the deadline happens, then you might not have the resources to get to some of the software. Some of that being one of the best resources is the fact that you have access possibly to free software if your income is below a certain threshold. If you look at prior tax returns prior to 2020 at this point in time, I don't think you have the same ability to get to that free software if your income is below a certain threshold. And if you go past this deadline, you may no longer have the access to it. So that's a big assistance to get the tax returns done and process them. So if you haven't done the tax returns, you plan on doing the tax returns, if you don't know if you should be filing a tax return or not, that software can be very useful in order to help answer those questions. And it looks like it's available up until October 15th. So while there's no penalty for filing after the deadline, if a refund is due, an extension of time to file is not an extension of time to pay taxes. So note, it's the same kind of system here, whereas if you owe money, or if they owe you money, the IRS owes you a refund, and you continue to extend the time period for which you file the tax returns, meaning you don't claim your refund, the IRS is not going to be as upset about that because they owe you money, and you're basically giving them a loan and saying, I'll collect on that money later. However, if you owe them money, then they are going to be upset about it because they're going to say, hey, we've said that you owed us money and now you're extending the deadline, and that means we're going to be charging you penalties and interest. So remember that the filing deadlines and the filing penalties and so on are different than the payment deadlines and penalties. So the extension itself wasn't an extension of time to pay, it's an extension of time to file, and the same goes for at this point in time. There's two kind of things you want to keep in mind. You're trying to avoid the stick from the IRS of penalties and interest. How do you do that? Well, there's two things to keep in mind: penalties related to the payments, penalties related to, and interest related to the filing requirements. So taxpayers who owe tax, even those who did not request an extension and have yet to file a 2020 tax return, can generally avoid additional penalties and interest by filing the return as soon as possible and paying any balance due. Even if the taxpayers can't afford to immediately pay the taxes they owe, they should still file a tax return as soon as possible to reduce possible penalties. So it's possible that you filed an extension and you're saying, hey, I'm just not dealing with it because I know I owe money at this point in time, and therefore I'm just going to kind of avoid it. Note that you don't really want to do that. You want to file the tax return, be in compliance as much as you can, pay as much as you can, so that you avoid the penalties and interest. Remember the goal here: avoid the penalties and interest. So how can you do that if you can't pay the taxes that you owe? You still file, making sure that you're in compliance with the filing requirements, and then you'd like to most likely set up some type of payment plan agreement so that you can reduce the penalties and at least mitigate the interest to as low as it can at that point in time. You can generally do that through just simply going onto the website and setting it up automatically without having to go to the IRS and say, I can't pay the tax. You could do most of it basically virtually. And so that's usually the best option to go for, because remember, again, you're trying to avoid the stick of penalties and interest. And if you delay it and don't take any action, then they're going to keep charging penalties and interest, and it'll slowly accrue upwards. So here are some tools available on irs.gov, irs.gov to help people with their taxes. IRS Free File and other electronic filing options. Most taxpayers can file their tax return electronically for free through the IRS Free File. This is one of the best options, or one of the biggest options for most people the ability to get to that software, because doing the tax return without software at this point in time is getting more and more complex, especially as we have these refundable credits that are going on, even on the low income side of the tax returns. In other words, it used to be that if you had a low income tax return, it would be a fairly easy tax return, you would think, given the fact that there's not much going on. But the more they kind of change these rules with regards to things like the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit and so on and so forth, healthcare related things and whatnot, and the refundability of it, then that complicates the basic returns. So you would really like to have software, and a lot of times that software would be free to take a look at. But note that if you go past the extension date, then you may not have access to software. You may not have access to the same kinds of resources, say, in prior years as you do for 2020. And if you let the deadline go by, you might not have access to those same resources to file the tax return after the extension date. So take a look at that if you haven't seen that. So other electronic filing options include using free tax return preparation site, commercial software, or an authorized e-file provider. There's a link to an e-file provider here, so you can take a look at that. Some free file products are available in Spanish as well. Filing electronically can also help taxpayers determine their earned income tax credit, child and dependent care credit, and recovery rebate credit. So those are some of the big credits these days, and it's worth looking into, even if you don't think you need to file. Because of these credits that are there, it may well be worth filing, and you check that out by using the software, hopefully the free software, to look into it. So if someone is eligible for the recovery rebate credits and either didn't receive economic impact payments or received less than the full amounts, they must file the 2020 tax return to claim the credit, even if they don't usually file. So if you don't normally file, it might be worthwhile. It's most likely worthwhile doing it just to make sure that you're picking up these things like the credits, which is the recovery rebate credit now for the 2020, which were the stimulus payments in essence. Direct deposit for refunds. The fastest way for taxpayers to get their refund is to file electronically and use direct deposit. Taxpayers who do not have a bank account can visit the FDIC website. There's a link to that here, or use the National Credit Union Administration's Credit Union Locator tool. There's a link to that tool here for information on where to find a bank or credit union to open an account online. Online payment options. If a taxpayer owes taxes, they should pay as much as possible as soon as possible to reduce penalties and interest. An extension to file is not an extension to pay. IRS Direct Pay, there's a link to Direct Pay here, allows individuals to securely pay from their checking or savings accounts. Visit irs.gov, irs.gov for additional payment options. There's a link to those payment options here. Account information and tax records. Individual taxpayers can visit irs.gov to manage their account. There's a link to that here. It might be well worthwhile looking at the account these days because of all these things that are kind of running through the IRS, including the prepayments and the stimulus payments and so on. So even just to do a normal kind of tax return, it's getting to the point that you might need some records from basically the IRS, and it might be easiest to find those records on your account. So it's probably worthwhile to set up your account, and then if you get anything like prepayments for, say, the child tax credit, or you get these stimulus payments and you want to know how much of the stimulus payments you got, that you can look these things up fairly easily. Also, if you make payments to the IRS other than withholdings like your business, then it's nice to be able to track the payments that are being made as well. So it used to be that being able to track this and having your account set up was pretty good if you're making estimated payments, was one of the main reasons, or if you needed transcripts. But now, again, even fairly simple tax returns, even the lower income tax returns that used to have fairly basic needs, have more complex needs with things like these prepayment items that are going on, refundable credits, and it's useful to set up the account oftentimes to deal with that. And it might be useful when you get to tax time, and whether you do the taxes yourself or work with someone else, to be able to look some of the stuff up on your account. So they can take a variety of actions, including viewing their balance and payment history, paying taxes, access tax records through Get Transcript, and more. Some people may have a different deadline to file their tax returns. Special deadline exceptions may apply for certain military service members and eligible support personnel in combat zone, the Mil Tax software is available to serve members and their families regardless of income, and is offered through the Department of Defense. So if you're in a military member, thank you for your service. If you're in a combat zone, the IRS may be gracious enough to allow a little bit more time to pay the taxes. We also have that Mil Tax online software, which is another free component of the online software, and it doesn't have the income cap for the people that are in the military. And I'm still go back and forth as to whether it would be better than the commercial softwares, even for military members. I'm not totally sure on that either way, because of course the Mil Tax, so in other words, if your income was below a certain threshold, you might have access to either the free software using the Free File option or the Mil Tax software here if you're in the military. And then the question is, well, which one would be better at that point in time? Because you would think that the proprietary software, something like a TurboTax, has been well tested in the market, although it's not in the specific industry or area of the military, whereas the Mil Tax, I don't think has been tested by the market, because I think it's provided by a nonprofit, the government in essence. And so I'm not sure. So the question would be, how good is it compared to the for-profit? But just the fact that it's geared specifically towards the military might mean their interview process is more designed to pick up those types of things, which there are many of them that could be different for military members than non-military members. So if anybody has some information on whether they think the Mil Tax is better than somebody that was using like a TurboTax or something like that, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. So people who have a valid extension and are in or affected by a federal declared disaster may be allowed more time to file. So if you're in a disaster area, you may have more time. There's a link to this here so you can check out more information if that's applicable to you. So more information can also be found in the link below, which is, what if I can't pay my taxes? There's a link to that here. If you're in that situation, you can click on that, and there'll be a link to this in the description.